Good evening, anyone watching live, and hello to anyone tuning in to the recording of this. Welcome to another Colour Vision Defective Pilot Association update. And this one's been triggered by a meeting with the CASA CEO and other executives and the recent Senate estimates hearing. We're joined this evening with two legends of the Colour Vision CVDPA Association and the battle, Arthur Pape and John O'Brien, and also a new pilot entering the commercial world and maybe the latter-day hero in the battle for enlightenment on CVD, and that's Simon Choice. My impression, or my short summary of where we're at, is there's been a lot of activity and a lot of correspondence and a lot of talk, and not much productivity. In fact, my characterisation of where we are now is we've gone backwards. And that is because CASA now maintains that there is no determined third tier test for colour vision deficiency. And they're now going to consult and come up with some plan or outcome as a consequence of that consultation. But as a consequence of there not being any currently validly determined third tier test, that is an operational situation, a simulation of an operational situation, candidates with colour vision deficiency can't actually comply with the law because the law says that they've got to do that third tier test if they fail the first and second. So we're in this bizarrely strange world in which the regulator is preventing people from complying with the regulations because the regulator has not done, and I don't think wants to do, its one job in relation to colour vision deficiency, and that's determine one or more tests simulating an operational situation, which Australia did have and then was dumped. The other point I'd make about going backwards is I'm not sure what they're going to learn about colour vision deficiency from more consultation, because everyone's position and all the data and the evidence, everyone's strong opinions are already known, and I don't really think that anyone's going to learn anything new other than the one job is to determine those tests. So I'm going to go around the virtual room here, and I'll start with Arthur. What was your impression out of the meeting on the 23rd of January with the CEO Pip Spence, PMO Manderson, Andreas Marcelja, and Jonathan Alec at CASA?
Yes, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us today or tonight. It's a pleasure to have you with us. And yes, Clinton's right. There has been quite a bit of activity. John Clinton and I made a trip to Canberra to meet with the director and several other executives, including the PMO. And my first impression was that they were fairly conciliatory. They gave the impression they understood our concerns about the use of the CAD, which was our major complaint, the use of the CAD as a third tier test, that is, as an operationally relevant test. And the indication was that was going to be corrected and has been corrected by the removal of the CAD from the third tier, but the third tier is now vacant. We were given an indication that there would be something solid to work with by the 12th of this month, at the latest the 13th. And what we've got is nothing more than yet another promise of more consultation. No decisions have been made. So with hindsight, the outcome has been very disappointing. Now, my comment about the proposition that they're putting to us now is that, and I echo what Clinton just said, that all the information is already known. The people that the director and her associates will be consulting are all going to be the same people. They're going to be the optometry profession, who really have no place in the determination of an operational test. They're going to be the same people with their fixed religious views on colour vision that we've heard many times over. I've heard them since 1976. And if it's not the same person, it's clones of those people that we'll be dealing with, or that CASA will once again pull into their echo chamber for their views. So I don't see a great deal of promise in the current proposition. And we will talk later about what may need to happen instead.
Yeah, and before I hand over to John, I should note that another consequence of what they're currently doing is that without the third tier test, as soon as someone's failed the first tier, two tiers, they make the decision that the person has not met the standard, even though the method of prescription includes that third tier test. So they've already decided that the person doesn't meet the standard before they've had an opportunity to comply with the regulations. Anyway, over to you, John. What's your impression of the meeting and of Senate estimates on Monday evening?
Yeah, thanks, Clinton. Thanks, Arthur. And yeah, good to be here with everyone tonight as well. And thanks, everyone, for tuning in. I think basically Clinton and Arthur have said everything. I'd agree with everything that they've said so far. Initially, my first impressions of the meeting when we were in Canberra, I was quite, I guess, optimistic about how it went, and thought hopefully we're going to have a good outcome. Obviously, CASA now want to go down this consultation phase, which is their prerogative. I guess the point I would make about that is there was no consultation when CASA decided to introduce the CAD test going on 10 years ago now. It was just literally introduced overnight. I was the very first candidate that was ever forced to do that. And of course, we now know that there have been many other people since then. Similarly, when the OCVA was suspended over 2 years ago now, there was no consultation when that happened either. So I find it a little bit puzzling that now they want to consult. And as Arthur said, they're not going to find out anything that they don't already know anyway. Obviously, CVDPA has been giving our views on all this now for going on 2 years since it was first suspended. And CASA already have the views of all the other side of the argument, I guess, from the optometry profession, etc. There's a couple of documents we're going to share and discuss tonight, but one of them that just reminded me of was an email that I got from Kate Manderson, the PMO, 2 years ago when this test was first suspended. And I wouldn't mind just actually reading it out just to show everyone how this all kicked off. So CVDPA, we became aware that there were a couple of candidates getting knocked back, having passed the OCVA when it was still available as a test. So we obviously contacted CASA to see what was going on. And this was the response that I got from Kate Manderson on the 17th of January, 2022. So 25 months ago now. It says, "Dear John, thanks very much for your messages. I'm very pleased to hear from you. We have had some concerns raised with the OCVA assessment process externally and internally. It's no reflection on your work. It's our processes that need some management. Because of that, we need to have a look at the forms and the assessment process and the way they are used by the assessors. This is something that came up in December last year, being December 2021. And we are still working through what the issues are and how they impact on people who have submitted their assessments recently, and what we need to be able to do to make sure the OCVA is acceptable and the results can't be questioned in the future. Rest assured, there is no change to CASA policy. The OCVA is here to stay. These issues are, I hope, going to push us along so the OCVA is as strong as it can be, possibly for the longer term and perhaps even in other jurisdictions." And it goes on to say, "We'd like your input on how to proceed with this." And we obviously went on to have a couple of meetings after that. Thank you from Kate Manderson. So that was 2 years ago, and here we are now.
Yes, with the OCVA having been suspended, as you say, without consultation. And of course, the PMO and the Deputy PMO wrote to all the assessors saying we're going to lead the world and strengthen the OCVA, and it's going to be a better mousetrap, etc. What's happened is we've gone backwards. And so, Simon, you've had some interactions with CASA, and you were I think the first crash test dummy for the OCVA. Where are you up to in your journey, I think is the idiom these days?
To my understanding, Clinton, thank you for having me as always. My understanding is I'm the first and only one to do the OCVA, which is baffling given the amount of people that I was told sat the OCVA and then later told the actual amount of people that sat the OCVA. So, yeah, I sat the OCVA November last year. CASA's point of view, as I said in the last meeting, the administrative side of CASA and the executive side of CASA were very good to me, very helpful to me, and they did say they would get back to me surrounding the ICAO Convention 6 restriction of my medical, which our friend Michael Tulip also has imposed on his, and he was told the same story. We'll get back to you. We're looking at it urgently and ASAP. And when I asked for written documented legislative, what the hell is it? I was told it's probably only going to prevent you from international flying. That's my understanding of it. And it wasn't here's what it does, here's what it is. I've had many people, including the school that I'm training at, go, what is it? And I go, I genuinely don't know. And they go, then what's it doing on your medical? Again, I genuinely don't know. Since then, pending the outcome of the Senate estimates hearing, I have sort of slept on it a little bit, but I haven't heard anything further from them as to where that's at.
Yes, and I'm not surprised because it's one of these many things that make sense to them but don't make sense in the real world. And I'll reiterate that I had an interaction with them back in 2015 when they put a restriction on my medical certificate, and I wrote to them and said, what does this restrict me from doing? What can I do that will result in me breaking a law? And they came back nothing, and I said, well, get it off my certificate. And I made an AAT application, and before we got there, I've got the letter, I'm happy to share it with anyone. I advise that CASA accepts your contention that a restriction in these terms cannot be lawfully placed on a medical certificate in the exercise of CASA's powers under Part 11 or Part 67 of CASA. For that reason, CASA agrees to resolve these proceedings on the basis that you issued with a Class 2 medical certificate with the restriction removed. And they did it just for me because I made noise about it. But the DAMI handbook, the infamous DAMI handbook, it gets changed in an uncontrolled way when anyone feels like it, is still full of lists of restrictions and endorsements, most of which are either unlawful or unnecessary or both, but they do it because they can, because they know that most people will not go through the stress and cost of actually going to the AAT and taking them on. And I've got a check written to me by CASA. I've taken this out of a frame, but that's a Commonwealth Bank check written by the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, and I keep that in a frame. But this, to me, is the product of an organisation that lacks what I call corporate integrity. Like, how could they say to one person, oh, yes, it's not lawful, we'll take it off, but continue on their merry way to do it to everyone else? That's just, I can't fathom how any organisation with any integrity could proper integrity could do that. And the mention of ICAO fascinates me as well, because we see all this high-sounding rhetoric in these documents about ICAO, and it's actually individuals expressing personal views about what ICAO doesn't require and allow and doesn't allow. But some very intelligent people had already done that analysis when they built the civil aviation safety regulations and the predecessors. And if we think about what happened during the period of Enlightenment, when the OCVA was being administered as a third tier test, resulting in medical certificates that were clean, so far as colour vision deficiency was concerned. Did anyone say boo about ICAO? There are people in CASA who are actually experts on the content of the ICAO. Surely they would have been ringing alarm bells loudly in the halls of management there, saying we can't do this, or if we do it, we have to file a difference from ICAO. That didn't happen for a very important reason, and a simple reason, because that testing regime is compliant with ICAO, and therefore they didn't need to file a difference. Now, we seem to now have come to the conclusion that the people in CASA have formed the view that Mr. Carmody and Dr. May, I think it was, were incompetent, dangerous people for allowing the OCVA not only to be implemented, but not filing a difference with ICAO, highlighting to the world what dangerous skies they had created. So, how they form their opinions about what ICAO does and doesn't require is interesting, because obviously the people who decided to introduce the OCV in Australia are begged to differ. Anyway, I'm just wondering now, did you want to speak to that specific document that from which Senator Fawcett quoted at estimates, John, because it is a very revealing document. It's was disclosed to us under FOI, and although I did write to the FOI part of CASA today to note that this stuff appears not to have been put on the CASA referred to on the I'm just going to add that, sorry, on the FOI disclosure log of CASA. These documents are not even mentioned, or even the fact that some have been disclosed to CVDPA members. So did you want to start talking to that, John?
John's muted.
You're on mute, John. You've made the classic mistake, I think. Well, I mean, if
okay.
Better.
There we go. How's that? Yeah, so for anyone who was watching Senate estimates a couple of nights ago, this was the document that Senator Fawcett referred to. It was a discussion brief from Dr. Tony Hosberg, who's the Deputy Principal Medical Officer in AVMed. As you can see, dated 17 December 2021. So this was basically the time when the OCVA was suspended. You might recall that email I just read out a few moments ago. That was dated January of 2022. So as you can see, the purpose of this discussion brief was that CASA AVMed basically reconsider changes regarding colour vision deficient medical certification that was implemented in January 2020. And that resulted in the removal of all endorsements on medical certificates for candidates who passed the OCVA. It's a 4-page document. I probably won't read through it all word for word. We can have it on the screen there, but basically it just goes through AVMed's recommendations, and it includes applying various restrictions here, as you can see. So the restrictions will be for colour vision, will be assessed by way of a flight crew licensing and flight standards operation assessment under Part 61 for each new aircraft type, and liaison where necessary with AVMed. And they talk about applying restrictions. So here's that restriction that Simon's got on his medical, that the holder does not fully meet the requirements of ICAO Convention Chapter 6 of Annex 1. Talks about having to disclose to any person that you're training with or being assessed by, essentially your CVD, that you're limited to Australian airspace. Single pilot operations limited to day VFR only. So you can see the thoughts here are very much a backward step compared to where we got to only just a few short years ago. And if we read down a little further here, there's the highlighted paragraph is the section that Senator Fawcett read out during estimates. There is an assumption following a pass on the OCVA that the absence of air accidents has been an indication of colour vision endorsements are unnecessary, rather than the alternate assumption that the paucity of air accidents to date is due to the application of appropriate colour vision controls by way of certain conditions on the medical certificate. So I'm not sure if Arthur wants to speak to that. It kind of goes to that line that you've heard plenty of times about the absence of evidence, doesn't it, Arthur?
It does. I've been reading and hearing various presentations of that notion since the late 70s. The reason that back then, because there were no accidents happening then either, and the reason given to me by the PMO, Dr. Morrison, was, well, that's because there's a standard and we apply it. So we keep you people from flying. That's why you're not having the accidents. Now the wisdom, there's no wisdom in that at all.
What I say is it's the old, they say the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And I say, well, subscribers to that must therefore believe that the giant flying spaghetti monster could exist, because there's an absence of evidence of the existence of the giant flying spaghetti monster. But I think the most important point that Senator Fawcett emphasised is a minor problem or a minor issue called the number of the hundreds of thousands of pilots certified by the US FAA, a large percentage, a substantial percentage of which have colour vision deficiency, and same as the NZ. Just before you go down further under these list of practical concerns, which is just an issue, a statement of someone's opinions or facts, I know that Arthur wanted to say something about that statement at number 1, that the OCV has not been subject to rigorous scientific peer review. Over to you, Arthur.
Yes. All right. So the OCVA had been the subject, I say, had been the subject of extensive investigation and a consultation between not only the parties within New Zealand and the parties within Australia, but between the two groups. So there was extensive consultation between officers of the CAA New Zealand and the officers of CASA Australia on the introduction of the OCVA. It was a very well thought out, and in our humble opinion, a very rational, fair, and practical test. Now, that said, but it was never subjected to what they call peer review. Now, peer review is something that happens within scientific circles. If you have if you have a successful experiment that proves there are 12 subatomic particles in the proton, and you give your explanations, then the peer review really, really hammers into that and checks out the integrity of your data. If we put, instead of the word OCVA there, and put initial instrument flight test, we could say the instrument flight test has never been subject to rigorous evaluation or scientific peer review. Does that make the instrument flight test invalid or lacking integrity or anything like that? Pick a test, any test, put it there instead of OCVA, and you'll find that statement's true of any practical assessment or test. So it's a not invalid point raised by Dr. Hochberg. The OCVA has multiple inherent flaws in the operational design and implementation. Well, that's an opinion statement. It's not based on any stated facts or observations. It is not true, and basically it's an element of smoke and mirrors by Hochberg. It's a nonsense statement. And we could go on and on about the rest of his points there below. The OCVA was widely accepted by the directors, the PMO in Australia, and quite a few of the medical staff in New Zealand. And for Hochberg to pull this stunt on us is a travesty. It's a travesty of fairness. It's a travesty of integrity. And I'll leave it at that. The OCVA was a very good test.
Yeah, and I wanted to make a comment about... You go ahead, John.
I was just going to make the point, obviously, Arthur said it was based on the New Zealand model, which has now been operating quite successfully for going on 5 years now without issue. But the New Zealand model itself was actually based on the FAA model, which has been around for, I'm not sure exactly when it started, but it'd have to be at least 2 or 3 decades, Arthur might recall. So these types of practical operational tests for colour vision are not sort of new concepts. They've been around for a long time, certainly in the US at least.
And as we know,
the only thing that I would say, I was just going to add the final point. The only thing I would say that was missing from CASA's process with the OCVA is that it probably was lacking documentation and guidance material to help standardise the test. As a flight examiner myself, we refer quite frequently to what they call the Flight Examiner Handbook, and that describes in great detail exactly how each particular flight test or proficiency check should be conducted. And CASA never produced anything similar for this OCVA. So, of course, when examiners went out there and tested candidates for it, there was going to be obviously differences in how the assessment was conducted. So going back to Kate Manderson's email to us 2 years ago, one of the very first things I did was I volunteered to draft a flight examiner handbook appendix for CASA, which we did and sent to them. And it's just been sitting on the shelf now for pretty close to 2 years. And that would have certainly helped standardise the assessment.
Yeah, so I was going to make a comment on the New Zealand and FAA issue. Of course, as we know, that CASA is doing nothing about the crews of transport category aircraft flying in and out of Australia from New Zealand and the United States. So if this was really a substantial problem, then and a safety issue, I mean, surely CASA would be doing something about it, but we know why they're not. And on that New Zealand point particularly, if you look at point 5 there, OCVA has seen multiple new Class 1 pilot applications spend their first hour flying, attempting to pass OCVA as their only recorded pilot hours and not followed traditional approaches of building flight experience before upgrading and developing experience in night flying. So it's not the traditional approach. Now, on that point, I note that in New Zealand, where there's a bit of enlightenment and humanity, their guidance says the colour vision assessment should be taken by, among other people wanting to become a pilot who are yet to enter expensive pilot training. They're saying to people, go off and give this a go, and it may be their first flying hour after failing Ishihara and Farnsworth or whatever the 2 tests are over there. But the sky is going to fall in because that's that first person's hour of flight experience. And there is plenty of traditional ways of doing things in aviation that have been abandoned long ago, despite all of the gloom and doom and the predictions that the sky would fall in if people went from nothing into the right-hand seat through an integrated course on a into a 737 without doing the hard yards in GA and the outback and all that sort of stuff. And it's all just strongly held opinion rather than data-based. The other thing the other ones that I had to laugh about is 10. there is no method to track CVD pilots currently. What does that mean? Do they want to put ankle bracelets on pilots? What does Hochberg mean by tracking CVD pilots? They've got their MRS, they've got all the medical details. Is it that they think that CVD pilots are out there having accidents and incidents and AVMED hasn't been able to track them? And
The buddies at the ATSB would tell them if that was the case. I'm dead sure of that.
Yeah, I don't even know what that means. Number 11, I laugh about. The approach taken is inconsistent with that for Class 3 medical certificates. Well, so what? That's because the legislature decided that the Class 3 medical certificate standard would be Ishihara alone. And whether that's justified or not, I don't know, but it's intended in the regulations. And CASA Files, in its differences, asserts that that Class 3 requirement to pass Ishihara alone exceeds ICAO requirements and says that the 3 tiers of testing for Class 1 and 2 are consistent with ICAO. And the reason Australia says that is because it's true. So his argument of inconsistency is completely fallacious. And I've actually reached out to someone that I know who's an extraordinarily experienced air traffic controller to reach out to current and previously serving air traffic controllers to find out where in air traffic control the colour of something is the sole conveyor of information, because if there are important systems in air traffic control where colour alone conveys the meaning of information, then that is bad design, plain and simple, in the 21st century. Mm. Do you want to go down to the...
Yeah, sure. I was just going to mention point 8 there as well. A pass on an OCVA is not an indication that an individual is colour safe permanently. Well, neither is any other flight test that people do. You pass a PPL or instrument rating test, that's no guarantee that you're safe for the rest of your life either. So
yes,
some of the logic
is just absolutely right. In their little stovepipes, they believe that medical certification is the sole process of trapping medical problems or change in medical conditions, which is again completely fallacious. If someone has a change in their vision, first of all, they might notice it themselves and do something about it, but they're subject to recurrent testing, and that AVMED doesn't know about. Well, too bad, too sad. You know, that's the way aviation runs.
Yeah,
May
right.
I comment? I'd like that that highlighted area, safety concerns. That's in Hochberg's letter, isn't it?
Yes.
So Hochberg is going against the opinions of the 3 tribunals who have all dismissed the significance of colour in the cockpit as having any relevance. They have dismissed the importance of or the safety criticality of runway and taxiway lighting. He has dismissed the views of the tribunal on every one of those aspects there. So he is the expert that is willing or feels competent to contradict all the operational people and all the legal people who've worked on this, all the lifelong pilots of CVD who've given evidence, and non-CVD pilots who've given evidence on these issues raised in that highlighted section. Dr. Hochberg is, in his own brain, the ultimate authority on these matters. And it's going to be statements like that that's going to be their downfall.
You can see, you know, without reading through
but the other downfall of his is he's making operational...
Say again?
Sorry, you go, Simon.
I was going to say, when you talked about his downfall, Arthur, the other big downfall of his is his approach to some of the people who speak to him on the phone, myself included, where he says, you're welcome to take this to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, but you won't win because you don't have the financial funding that CASA does. Oh, and by the way, I'm not a pilot. So there are other two nails in his coffin from my point of view, and I intend to pursue that. So.
Well, when you do, I'll be happy to back you up, because I was given the same threat in the late or the mid 80s by the then director, Jim Morrison, who said, you'll have your day in court, buddy, but even if you win, we'll beat you because we'll appeal and bust you financially.
Yeah, that's what Hochberg said. He said, you're welcome to take it to the AAT, but I guarantee you, you will not have the financial funding that CASA does.
It is not about science. It's not about a rational discussion. It's about power. And it's cloaked in smoke and mirrors with multiple instances of the word safety thrown in for good measure to give it some flavour. It has never been, except in the sunshine days, the days of enlightenment, when we were talking face to face with the former director, who recognised that the issue was not a medical issue at all, that it was an issue that had to be determined by people with operational expertise. And here we again have the AVMED branch pretending they know better. And we have a director who hasn't got the spine, it seems, to tell them to stop and desist.
And you're talking about smoking.
And it's not even up to them to create that third-tier test. It's not up to the AVMED branch to create a third-tier test. It's up to the operational staff of CASA to create it and make it fair. They don't have to go far because there's one already on the books, and they can say, that looks very satisfactory to us, and that we declare to be valid as a third-tier test of operational safety and the ability to perceive the necessary information for safe performance by people who happen to have a CVD condition. That's
I've passed from a candidate who's passed both. What was the previously accepted OCVA and the OCVA guinea pig trial I got put through in November. Passing both without issue. I then voiced my concerns to CASA and to you guys, clearly stating that I do not believe the ACVA is an efficient, safe, nor effective way to measure the colour requirements within civil aviation. And that was echoed by flight schools. It was echoed by the flight examiner partially by the flight examiner who assessed me when I said to him, I've gone, look, I appreciate the work you've done on this, but I said, I think there is more to do with safe air navigation than PAPI lights. He goes, I agree. And I said, so why am I being assessed solely on PAPI lights? And he didn't have an answer because, to my suspicion, it wasn't him driving the show.
Yeah.
There we have it.
And I see there that highlighted line there. Did you want to say something, John?
No, I was just going to probably just make another comment. Obviously, I read out that email from Kate Manderson at the start of this whole process talking about the OCVA being strengthened and here to stay for the long term. But then you look at some of these comments in AVMED's very own discussion paper, you can see it's going completely against, everything that we've come up with in this operational test. They've obviously got significant concerns with it within AVMED.
Yes.
The other smoke.
Go ahead, Simon.
I was just saying, to echo what John and Arthur just said about the smoke and mirrors and AVMED going against the executive of CASA, it was paramount when Senator Fawcett read this exact document and mentioned it to Andreas Marcella and Ms. Pip Spence to say, hey, are you aware of this? They've both gone, no. So you talk about smoke and mirrors, saying the left hand isn't telling the right hand something, or they're deliberately hiding it. The next thing in the Senate estimates was CASA not disclosing gifts or entitlements. So there's a whopper. How are they expected? How can we trust them to disclose things to the public when they can't disclose things to themselves internally? Or deliberately don't, to be deceitful to get their own agenda?
Yeah. I think John's off saving the children from in the background. That document that's up on the screen there also included that highlighted line, which is a reference to a Class 1 pilot who failed the OCVA. Now, the reason that's highlighted is because CVDPA kept being told, no pilot ever failed the OCVA, so therefore that's something wrong with the test. We said, well, assuming that logic to be true, which it doesn't necessarily follow, but assuming it does follow, well, the fact is CASA says that a Class 1 pilot who failed OCVA but passed Farnsworth. So there's someone who failed. And again, this illustrates the mindset of the people that are looking at this. It may be that the pilot failed the OCVA because they were incompetent on the day. The failure might have had nothing to do with their good or bad colour vision deficiency. Does CASA do an analysis of people who fail their flight tests to see whether the cause of their failure is their normal vision? So we pointed out to them that their own document said that there was someone who'd failed the OCVA, but they got then Hochberg complains that he got all CVD conditions, restrictions, and moved, but the person passed Farnsworth. Well, if they passed Farnsworth, then they're entitled to they're entitled a clean certificate. I haven't passed Farnsworth, and I haven't passed or failed OCVA. Too bad, too sad. So this logic makes sense to them, makes perfect sense, at least to Dr. Hochberg. But not only was the assertion that no one had failed wrong in fact, but this example points out the basic concept that CVDPA has always said, and that is, all this is just about competence, measuring competence, people's competence. And they're either competent whether they have colour deficiency or not. And that's where we're at. I hope you've saved your children in the background there, John.
Yeah, no, I have. All good. Thank you. I'll stop sharing this screen if you like. I've just noticed we're getting quite a few comments and some questions coming through. So maybe now's a good time to maybe just rattle off a few of these as well.
Well, I wanted to quickly answer Bradley Stewart's question. What are the next steps from here? Well, again, we are in this situation where CVDPA's recommendation at the moment, until this is sorted out, is for aspiring pilots and people who are counting on a stable career in aviation to go to New Zealand or the USA, because all this demonstrates what we're going through at the moment is the ease with which unilateral and destructive decisions can be made by CASA with no consultation and completely throw into disarray people's lives, people's plans. We don't know when they're going to come up with a new OCVA, because if we take them based our judgment on what they do rather than what they say, it's very difficult to know and predict where we're going to be at the end of March, whether we're going to be at the end of April. And I know that if one of my sons had colour vision deficiency and wanted to be a pilot, I'd say, go to New Zealand. Go to New Zealand, get your licence and your medical certification over there, go to the USA, because not only they're enlightened, their regulator has some humanity. So that's a question that jumped out at me. Are there anyone else that we can talk to, Simon?
Say that again. Sorry, Clinton. I just missed the last part of that.
I looked. That question from Bradley Stewart was in front of me, so I thought that was an important one that I dealt with, but I haven't been keeping track. Are there any others that you think that are worth?
There's a couple there that John's about to bring up.
So I'll just might as well start from the top. There's one from Joanne Walters. Thanks, Joanne. Says, thanks, Clinton, Arthur, John and Simon for your continued work. My son Scott is 19 with the Class 2, and I are doing what we can here in Cairns through our local federal member, Warren Inch, I'm guessing. So, yeah, thank you for that. And I guess we'd obviously encourage anyone to write to their local federal MP as well. Obviously, we can see Senator Fawcett is doing a lot of advocacy for us behind the scenes, but I would certainly encourage any CVD pilot or even non-CVD pilots to write to their local member just to highlight this issue and what's going on. You can obviously refer them to speak to Senator Fawcett, who's got a fairly in-depth knowledge of all of this as well. We've also got some comments from Michael T. The same applied when the control tower signal gun light was used as a third tier test. This is going back probably 10 to 15 years ago now. Passing that gave you a restriction-free medical. Yeah, it was actually, yeah. So passing the signal gun test also gave candidates a restriction-free medical. The comments about the OCVA are irrelevant to night or instrument flight experience. Pilots still need to complete the experience and competency requirements for the issue of an operational rating. So I'd completely agree with that as well. Like the OCVA is just one of the steps, I guess.
Yeah, I agree with John and Michael on this because look at me, I'm a very inexperienced pilot, Class 1 medical student aviator, and one of the things you have to have before you can even start, before you can start to fly, is a medical. How do you do that if you've got a colour vision restriction? They go, oh, we want you to have 1,000 hours to do it, but hang on, we're not going to give you a medical to do it in the first place. So their logic's completely backwards.
Yeah. Yeah, and obviously, as we've pointed out time and time again, the OCVA is just the first step. Our pilots still got to go through all the phases of flight training and flight testing on the way to achieving various licenses and ratings. Got a comment from... sorry, Simon.
I was about to say the same thing. Go, John.
Yep, there's another comment here from Sandy Reith. He says CASA is going from bad to worse, and not only in their disgraceful treatment of CVD pilots. How to cause CASA to reform? Any ideas, Clinton? You've been doing this for a while.
I just posted a comment saying my audio is very patchy at this end. Can you guys hear me now? Okay.
Yeah, we got you, mate.
Yes.
Yeah. I was going to make a comment about the human rights question. In the Civil Aviation Act, there is specific authority for CASA to make regulations that are in breach of the Sex Discrimination Act and the Disability Discrimination Act. And that's why we still have in Part 67 a regulation and a power for that says a pregnant woman's medical certificate is automatically suspended at the end of the 30th week of pregnancy because, as we know, pregnant women and their obstetricians are too brain-addled and incompetent to be able to make a decision whether the woman is safe to do a few circuits in a Cessna 152, even though she's safe to be able to get into a huge Land Cruiser and drive around with her for other children in the 31st week of pregnancy. So what we're up against is...
Add to that, Clinton.
Yeah.
The same governing body, but albeit a different sector, in the words of education. Funnily enough, one of the questions I did in my recent exam was a female pilot when pregnant, when is it unsafe to do so? And the answer to that was when her DAMI and herself make the decision that it is uncomfortable for her to fully use the controls of the aircraft. So there's two different departments of CASA giving you two different bits of information on another piece of life. Yeah.
Well, I could quote to you the provision of the regulations that say it's suspended automatically after a certain time. Maybe CASA's done its usual trick and regulated by exemption and changed that. But the strategic point I was making here is we're up against very anachronistic thinking which is assumed by the general public as the reason why we have safety. All of these things are causing safety, and it's very hard to get members of the general public to understand that when you analyse the objective evidence, what we actually have is damaging overreactions to the objective risk, especially in medicine in the 21st century, in Australia, especially where we have damaging overreactions. As to how we change things, the only way to change things is to change government policy, and the only way to change government policy is to change government. It's a political question. CASA is the creation of the parliament, and so it's only the parliament which can change CASA's functions, powers, priorities, and all that sort of stuff. And if we don't have a parliament that's inclined to change the legislation fundamentally, then CASA will continue on its merry way, and it's up to individuals to go through the stress and cost of taking them on, which is an appalling state of affairs, in my view.
I have a question from a candidate who recently sat the CAD test. Coincidentally, after the decision, or they advised him to do it before they told anyone that they were suspending the CAD and not allowing anyone to do it. He has since sat the CAD under AVMED's direction. What would be your advice to candidates like that have done that, despite CASA's executive going, well, no, we're not actually going to use that at the moment?
Did he pass it?
No.
So
just to clarify too, I don't believe CASA haven't actually said they're suspending the CAD test as such. What they've said is that they're not utilising it as a third-tier test anymore, which is what they've been doing for the last 10 years. And as we all know, it's never, ever simulated an operational situation. Now they're still utilising it as far as I can tell, just under a different provision in the regulations, where they talk about flexibility and CASA being able to direct people to undertake any other tests that they see fit. And that's probably actually a nice segue into an email that we sent to Pip Spence a few days ago. We basically wrote to her and said, well, we recognise CASA is now going to be going through this consultation phase, which, as we all know, is going to take months, not weeks. And we said to her in the interim, in response in particular to her comments to Senator Fawcett a few nights ago, where she's made comment in the estimates that CASA is not forcing people to go down the CAD path. In fact, that we've had one candidate who has done an operational assessment, obviously being yourself, Simon. So we wrote to her and we said, okay, well, if you're going to be consulting for the next several months, is CASA going to allow people to at least do some form of operational tests in an interim phase until the final outcome is reached? And we got an email back today, which I'll share shortly as well. But we didn't really get a clear answer on that, did we, Clinton?
No, and that's again why the CVDPA recommendation at the moment is don't do anything past Ishihara and Farnsworth unless CASA tells you that the next test that they want you to do is a third-tier test, the passing of which will result in you getting a clean certificate. Because if they don't do that, then that extra test is simply more cost, more inconvenience, and just gives CASA more ammunition to beat you with after they've already decided you failed to meet the medical standard. That's why it's an extraordinary state of affairs, but that's where we're in at the moment. And I'll remind everybody the reason why they've swept CAD under the carpet as a third-tier test. Two reasons. One is I put in an FII request for the document evidencing the exercise of the power of determination for it to be a valid test. They couldn't produce that document. Secondly, they realised that after CVDPA foreshadowed a federal court challenge to the validity of the CAD, on the basis it doesn't simulate a simulated operational situation, someone probably tapped them on the shoulder and said, yes, given that it doesn't simulate an operational situation, we might have a bit of problems convincing the federal court that a reasonable person could determine it to be a third tier test. So now it's been, we're hoping it's going to go away. That's why we're saying let's not, unless you're a masochist and like spending time and money to give CASA data and more information after they've already decided you don't meet the standard. Don't do any more testing after the first two until they come up with a proper third tier test.
Can I say something in regard to a comment made by a viewer? John, correct me if I'm wrong. There's a Jordan Penning has made a comment. Would that be the Jordan Penning of the UK?
It is. Yes. Hello, Jordan. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, thanks, John. Thanks, Jordan. Also from me. It's good to hear from you. I'm glad you're watching. Sorry we haven't been more helpful. Jordan, just for the other viewers, is heading a group in the UK and Europe fighting the even, well, I can't say worse, but the ultra conservative standards being applied in Europe and the UK. Jordan's very determined to try and emulate the sort of progress we've made over the years in Australia and New Zealand. It's nice to see you're watching, Jordan. Thank you.
Yeah, so on the screen now, I've got a response that we received back from CASA today from Andreas Marcella, who's the Executive Manager of Stakeholder Engagement. For anyone who watched the estimates the other night, he was the other gentleman that responded to some of the questioning from Senator Fawcett, along with Pip Spence. So he's obviously, thanks for your note. It's been brought to my attention that our correspondence with you is being selectively published online, along with our commentary. So I provide this response to you in that context. And as you can see, he doesn't have any concerns with us publishing this information if we choose to. So hence why we're sharing it tonight. And I guess part of the reason why CVDPA is sharing this information is obviously because it's in all of our interest to know what's going on. Certainly if you log on to the CASA website now, you won't find anything at all really about CVD. And this has been dragging on for the better part of 2 years now. So of course we have to share this information as and when it becomes available so people can make decisions. For anyone who doesn't know, just on that topic as well, we've got a long-running thread on PPRUN, the Professional Pilots Rumour Network. People may have seen that. I'll post a link in the chat for anyone who hasn't read it, but that's another good way of keeping up to date with things that are going on. But yeah, Clinton, do you want to maybe talk to some of the things in this email here?
I am having difficulty reading it. I'll make two comments. I did laugh when I noted that Mr. Marcelja appeared to be feigning surprise that correspondence written by a public official in their capacity as a public official to members, one or more members of the public, was then quoted and commented on and analysed by members of the public. There's nothing classified or secret about any of this, and there are hundreds of thousands of members of the public affected by CASA's approach to colour vision deficiency. I'll just make one point. What's remarkable in there is what isn't in there, because the CVDPA asked the question, is it possible that the outcome of this consultation and its implementation will be the deletion of the third tier test provisions from the class 1 and 2 medical standards? And we didn't get an answer to that question. So that speaks volumes to me.
Yeah, I was going to say that probably the only comment on that is he says here CASA acknowledges the current situation is not ideal for pilots. who are unable to pass the clinical tests, and that a resolution is taking far longer than expected. To create long-term stability, so this is what CASA are looking to do now, is they want to develop and consult on a legislative instrument to formalise what tests are available to pilots who are unable to pass the current clinical tests for colour vision, being the Ishihara and Farnsworth. And he does say that this will include a third-tier test as envisaged by 67.150, paragraph 6. So I note that they don't specifically use the word operational anywhere in there. So one would hope that that third-tier test, if it's still going to be there, will indeed be an operational test and not the CAD test. So yeah, it says we're currently planning that process.
The one thing I'd love to see happen out of this, forget the consultation period, we know it's going to take months. They had an operational assessment which was successful, it was comprehensive, and it provided a very, very, very clear picture as to what is required for colour vision deficient pilots to safely operate an aircraft in day and night conditions. They deviated from that. They come up with the OCVA. Surely in the meantime, while they root around with this, they can go, you know what, this was in place. Why don't we put it back in? I know I'm speaking to the choir here. I know I'm pushing it up a hill with a toothpick, but would that not be the most or the safe or the easiest approach for everyone?
Well, not for the zealots who think colour vision continues to be something that means there are pilots flying around who are dangerous. They're just waiting for the day that they can point the finger at an accident like Tallahassee and say that was caused by colour vision deficiency. I mean, as to this legislative instrument, I'm intrigued about that. I mean, all of this reference to policy in these documents, policy, there's a mechanism to make policy mandatory. It's called the law, and Part 67 is the law, and it's already got provisions in there for demonstration of compliance. And the only thing they need to do is to determine that third tier test. And I could draft the instrument of determination for them in 6 minutes. I blah blah blah, delegate blah 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 blah, and determine the test. The reason they're not doing it is because they don't want to. And I just think that, I mean, the kindness I can be to Pip Spence is what she's trying to do is to make everybody happy through consultation. And if that's what she's generally trying to do, then she's more of an optimist than Pollyanna, because that's never going to happen. And so that's why when I read all of these things, I can't tell from it what it is that they are going to do and how long it's going to take. And that of itself is their kind of uncertainty. And, you know, we've had all these people say it's the uncertainty as to their career that this manifests. They could, let's be optimists and say they fix it in 2 months to our satisfaction. Well, everyone is still sitting there thinking, but any time down the track, we'll have other people change their minds and change the policy.
Yeah, so when Pip Spence goes through when she's at the end of a contract, and either she comes on board as the next, or a recumbent CEO or a new CEO comes on board, does Tony Hochberg again go, you know what, I'm going to do this behind the new CEO's back because I didn't agree with what the old one did? So it doesn't make us sleep any easier at night.
No. But on that melancholy point, unless do you have any further final comments, Arthur?
Yes, I do. One final comment. I am now not nearly as optimistic as I once was about this being resolved in the short term. I think there is a very real possibility, in fact, a probability, that we will have to resort to the federal court in a meaningful way. We haven't actually thought this through in terms of what we would demand or ask the court to do for us. But a federal court litigation on the question of colour vision seems to me to be a more likely outcome than it was a few months ago. So, that said, I have to also say that isn't going to be an easy task, and it isn't going to be a cheap task. So anyone watching or who has friends who may be affected by this, please refer them to the CVDPA and start thinking about making a contribution, because this is going to be a big, big deal. And I'll leave it at that. Clinton, you needed to say something.
Okay. No, John, any final comments from you?
No, and I'd just probably add on that support request as well from Arthur. Not only aspiring pilots who are obviously in the early stages of their career now trying to get this resolved, but there's obviously a lot of existing pilots out there working in airlines at the moment that have been flying for many years, that have got unrestricted medicals in the past as a result of things like the signal gun test when it existed, and maybe even the OCVA in more recent years as well. Certainly, if there's any pilots, existing professional pilots out there, we'd encourage you to hopefully support us as well, because you never know when they could come after you again.
Indeed. And over to you, Simon. Any final comments?
To reiterate what John said, I said it last time, you're not alone going through it, and some of us are still going through it, albeit in smaller stages, and others are deep in the woods of it. So if you need to talk, reach out. You can reach out to CVDPA, you can reach out to me, they can give you my contact details. And if you're battling with AVMED, or if you're battling with CASA, or where you sort of sit with it, I'm happy to help out in any way I can. So don't hesitate to contact me.
Thanks, Simon. And on the same theme, I note that I don't have colour vision deficiency, but I've been AVMEDed, and so I say to people who don't have colour vision deficiency, you should be supporting the CVDPA as well, because we all need to be united in fighting back against folklore, superstition, zealotry, and all of the other things that mean that we're treated currently by AVMED as their guinea pigs. So I'll say on behalf of the Colour Vision Deficient Pilot Association, Defective Pilot Association, and its members, thanks for everyone who tuned in or those who watch it later, and we will keep you updated on progress as and when it's worth updating. Thank you very much.
Thank you.